Good evening. After 8 weeks of bombing, NATO claimed today that Slobodan Milosevic is at last feeling the heat. Spokesman cited up to 1,000 desertions from the garrison in Kosovo, outbreaks of civil unrest in Serbia itself, and an apparent new willingness in Belgrade to look for a political deal. NATO claims that the desertions appear to have been triggered by anti-war demonstrations in Serbia, with conscripts returning to support their families in clashes with the police. From the Yugoslav capital, Belgrade, our World Affairs editor, John Simpson.
Belgrade presented these pictures as showing Yugoslav troops withdrawing from Kosovo, though that was much questioned. Now, though, reliable sources have told the BBC that 2,000 Serbian reservists have left and gone home without orders. The commander of the 3rd Army Corps, General Pavkovic, apparently told them they could leave their uniforms and weapons and could have certificates confirming they'd fought in the conflict. Perhaps this was a way of avoiding more trouble. 1,000 of the men from towns in southern Serbia have already returned home. These were the towns where there were demonstrations against the war on Monday. It could well be that the heavy NATO bombing of sites across Kosovo has led many of the less experienced soldiers to want to get out. Conditions must have been terrible for many of them. In the meantime, for opponents of the government here, the atmosphere has been getting much more difficult. Vuk Obradovic of the Social Democracy Party was officially branded a traitor by the Yugoslav army today, and a carefully organized crowd of 100 or so attacked the headquarters of the Democratic Party in Belgrade. They threw eggs and paint at the building, angry at the party's demands for a deal with NATO. Anyone associated with the Democratic Party had a hard time of it. These pictures are from Serbian television. Our own report, which showed close-ups of the hard men who turned up for the demonstration, was censored in its entirety.
John Simpson joins me now from Belgrade. John, how sensitive are the authorities there to the reports of desertion? Are they being denied?
Well, we're entering a very sensitive phase indeed, which is, of course, why our report was censored in its entirety. The subject simply hasn't been mentioned, and it really is very difficult at the moment to put it to any of the relevant government sources, since there are very few opportunities even to do that now.
We've been told for a long time that the bombing was uniting the people behind Milosevic. Are there signs now that it is having the opposite effect?
Well, we can assume that it's affecting certainly some of the reservists in Kosovo. We don't know how many that will be, and presumably it must be affecting the army quite considerably there. But here in Belgrade, it still makes people angry. The effects of the NATO's errors, though they've been very few in number, the effects have been really serious, and that's combined, I think, still to make people feel unified. But the key thing is that most people want to get the war finished, and I suspect they don't care too much the terms that it's done on.
But if NATO attempted to think the air war is now working, and these latest signs show that, are they being a bit premature?
Well, I mean, the key thing is that President Milosevic is preparing himself for a diplomatic agreement in some form or another, in which he will survive in power and which will be presented by him as being a major victory. And it seems now, I mean, he must assume that there isn't going to be a ground war, so presumably he's preparing himself for that, and people will no doubt accept that here.
Well, diplomatic efforts to find a solution to the crisis have indeed been gathering pace. The Russian Special Envoy Viktor Chernomyrdin is back in Belgrade, and representatives of the Group of 8 industrial powers have been meeting in Bonn. The Foreign Office has confirmed that a suspension or pause in the bombing campaign is under discussion, but only after President Milosevic has complied with all NATO's demands.
This could be a critical week in the search for peace in Kosovo, says the UN Secretary-General. Today, it was his turn to visit the refugees camped out on Macedonia's border and reassure them getting them home to Kosovo before winter is now a top priority.
I think the UN is going to have to play a central role. First of all concerned believe that this UN has to be a central part of the solution.
But it's getting to the solution that's the problem. At NATO's headquarters, alliance strains were showing again today. The German Chancellor was decidedly tetchy when asked why, unlike Tony Blair, he so categorically rules out ground troops.
If it comes down to a choice between risking losing the war and using ground troops, which would you choose?
Geben Sie sich keine Mühe.
I won't get drawn into a theoretical debate on the war, he said, that's specifically British. Even so, NATO allies in the G8 group have now come up with a concrete plan for a settlement. Their political directors in Bonn today, for the first time, were presenting it to their Russian counterpart. Their roadmap, as they call it, proposes a UN Security Council resolution on Kosovo along general terms agreed already. And if Belgrade accepts that, there'd need to be verifiable proof of a Serb withdrawal. Only then NATO would stop bombing for 7 days to allow a complete troop pullout. And after that, an international security force would move into Kosovo. The concrete offer of a 7-day bombing pause is something of a concession. And there's another one. If all Serb troops withdraw from Kosovo, say diplomats, a limited number could be allowed back in to help clear mines, for instance, or even man border posts. But the most controversial question, on which there's still no agreement, has still deliberately been left vague: the makeup of an international peace force for Kosovo. NATO is insisting it's their troops that should be in charge, but so far not even Russia's special envoy, back again today in Belgrade, has signed up to that, let alone the man who really matters, President Milosevic. Peace may be some way off yet.
The Yugoslav government claims it has defeated the only armed opposition on the ground, the Kosovo Liberation Army. But the KLA insists that its 50,000 soldiers are still fighting and that more volunteers are joining them all the time. They also say they actually control parts of the province, mostly along the border with Albania. Our correspondent Ben Brown crossed the border and travelled to one of the KLA's bases at Kasari.
Marching towards the front line and marching maybe towards death, the young soldiers of the Kosovo Liberation Army. I met up with them at Kashari in southwestern Kosovo, a place of dense woodland where you can't always see who is shooting at who. The rebel headquarters at Kashari is a hive of activity. They're reinforcing, bringing crates of ammunition over the border from Albania, though they're not keen to advertise the fact. Tractors bring in supplies, and so do horses. NATO's war against the Serbs may be high-tech, but the KLA's certainly is not. The strategic aim of these rebel soldiers is to punch a corridor through Serbian lines so they can link up with their fellow fighters elsewhere in Kosovo. For now, though, that's still a dream. The rebels of the Kosovo Liberation Army say they're pushing forward against Serbian positions every single day now. Even so, it does not appear that they have managed to win back significant amounts of territory. And they're finding, like NATO, that the war against the Serbs is not an easy one to win. Some of the rebel recruits are raw. They're Albanians who've come from all over Europe to fight here, thrown into the front line with only the most basic of training. But they told me what they lack in experience, they make up for in motivation. Do you think you can win against the Serbs?
Yes, of course. We're fighting to win for future of Kosovo, you know that.
How is the war going?
It's very good. It's very good. Yes. Every day it's good.
You think you are winning against the Serbs here in Kosovo?
Of course, of course, of course.
And what about NATO? Are they helping you?
Thank you, NATO. Thank you.
The rebels took me to the scene of what they said was one of their recent victories, a Yugoslav army base they had captured and destroyed after a ferocious battle. Certainly there's not much left of it now. They showed me letters they said they'd found on dead Serbs, one from a soldier's brother. Please bring me back the body of an Albanian, he says, so I can cut its head off. Like NATO, the KLA claim they are fighting the poison of ethnic hatred and waging a just war.